Imagine a world trembling on the edge of history. A single decision could ignite or avert a war that defines generations. For years, Russia and Ukraine have clashed in a conflict that has reshaped lives, cities, and economies. Kyiv streets echo with the memories of fear. Moscow towers cast long shadows over a nation watching, waiting and calculating every move. Headlines scream of tanks, sanctions, and shattered treaties. But rarely do they ask the question that chills the mind. What if it didn't have to end this way? Now imagine the impossible. A handshake. Not a temporary ceasefire. Not a hollow gesture, but a true, historic act of reconciliation between Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky. One moment that could rewrite borders, economies, and alliances in ways no one dared to dream. Behind closed doors, advisors whisper. In Kyiv and Moscow, leaders weigh history against ambition. Every glance, every gesture, every carefully chosen word could tip the balance between chaos and a new world order. Secret channels buzz. Intelligence agencies decode every subtle signal. Analysts predict disaster even as diplomats quietly hope. The tension is suffocating, almost tangible. Because here lies the truth. Peace, if it comes, will not arrive quietly. And yet even as fear dominates, there is curiosity. Humanity clings to the unthinkable. Could a single handshake stop the spiral of conflict? Could it undo decades of mistrust, propaganda, and aggression? Could one act of courage ripple across continents, altering not just two nations, but the entire world? This documentary takes you into that world of what could have been. We will trace the origins of the conflict, uncover hidden moments of tension, follow the silent negotiations, and imagine a reality where the impossible becomes real. Every decision matters. Every action has consequences. And in the shadow of what was and what might be, suspense waits at every turn. Prepare to witness history in a way you've never seen it before. A world where peace and peril hang by a thread, and a single handshake could change everything. Origins and early tensions. The story begins decades before a handshake could even be imagined. Russia and Ukraine, neighbors, intertwined by history, yet divided by ambition, pride, and fear. In Moscow, Vladimir Putin ascended through the shadows of intelligence and power. Calculated, patient, a strategist who saw borders as malleable and history as a tool. In Kyiv, Volodymyr Zelensky emerged, not as a politician shaped by war, but as a symbol of a nation determined to claim its own destiny. Two men, two nations, paths destined to collide. Tensions simmered long before tanks rolled across borders. Crimea was annexed in 2014, a move that sent shockwaves across the globe. But beyond headlines, beneath treaties and press statements, small, critical moments were lost to history. Opportunities for dialogue, secret back-channel conversations, whispers of compromise that never materialized. Each missed chance became a shadow hanging over the present. Behind closed doors, advisors calculated every risk. In Moscow, generals debated the cost of international backlash versus the prestige of power. In Kyiv, ministers and strategists weighed alliances and defenses, knowing every decision could determine the fate of millions. And while the world watched the overt conflicts, tanks, airstrikes, economic sanctions, an unseen battle raged in whispers, in telegrams, in encrypted emails. Could diplomacy ever find its way? The stakes were not only political, they were deeply human. Citizens on both sides lived under a persistent tension, caught between loyalty, survival, and hope. Families fled cities. Children grew up with sirens as lullabies, and markets oscillated under the weight of uncertainty. And yet, in the shadows, a question lingered. What if a handshake was possible? Not a symbolic truce, not a fleeting political maneuver, but a genuine act of reconciliation that could rewrite decades of hostility. What ripple effects might follow if Putin and Zelensky found common ground? Even for a moment, could distrust be overcome? Could fear be set aside? Across Europe, global powers monitored every development. Washington debated strategy. NATO analysts calculated scenarios that could tip from peace to disaster in hours. Economists predicted shocks in energy, trade, and security. Meanwhile, intelligence agencies quietly mapped possibilities, tracking every gesture, every conversation, every hint that the impossible might become possible. The tension escalated further as minor skirmishes, cyber attacks, and diplomatic posturing intensified. Every move, every statement, every threat carried consequences that echoed across continents. Yet even here, in this volatile landscape, the potential for a single act, an unexpected handshake, remained the greatest variable, because history is never fixed. Every choice by Putin or Zelensky, every decision by their advisors, every unspoken signal in a tense corridor of power could either ignite further conflict or open the door to peace. As we trace the path forward, one truth becomes unavoidable. The handshake was more than a gesture. It was a pivot point, a question dangling over the world. And as you watch this story unfold, ask yourself, could the impossible really happen? Could a single act of courage, intelligence, and timing reshape not only two nations, but the entire world? Rising suspense. The world holds its breath. As the possibility of a handshake lingered in the shadows, the world began to react, silently, cautiously, and with bated breath. Every corner of the globe felt the tension of what could happen next. In Washington, President Biden and his top advisors convened in secure rooms. Analysts ran simulations predicting outcomes no one could fully control. Would a handshake stabilize Europe? Or would it expose vulnerabilities in the very alliances meant to prevent war? Every line of data, every classified report carried a question mark. One wrong interpretation, one misstep, could cascade into catastrophe. Across the Atlantic, European capitals buzzed with unease. Berlin, Paris, and Warsaw were not merely spectators. They were active participants in a silent game. European leaders debated contingency plans, military readiness and economic shockwaves. Energy pipelines, trade agreements, and political alliances were all suddenly hanging by threads, spun from a single potential act. Meanwhile, in Kyiv, Zelensky wrestled with history and responsibility. Advisors whispered about risks that went beyond borders, internal dissent, public perception, and the delicate optics of appearing weak to a populace hardened by years of conflict. In Moscow, Putin faced pressures that no leader could fully anticipate. Generals, oligarchs, and advisors, each with their own agenda, each capable of undermining or accelerating the fragile possibility of peace. The stakes extended far beyond the two nations. Across Asia, Beijing and Tokyo watched with calculated interest. China considered how a sudden détente could shift power balances, while Japan prepared for ripple effects in trade and regional security. Even distant capitals in Africa and Latin America monitored developments, understanding that global economics and energy could pivot in an instant. Yet amid this tension, unseen threads wove a web of potential. Secret intermediaries communicated across borders, retired diplomats, intelligence officers, and mediators working quietly to push both leaders toward an unprecedented gesture. Every coded message, every subtle hint carried the weight of history. The world's fate was being negotiated not in headlines, but in whispers and encrypted signals. Closer to the front lines, the human element intensified suspense. Soldiers, once primed for battle, paused, unsure whether to obey orders or trust the possibility of peace. Families in Kyiv prepared for the worst, yet dared to hope. Across Moscow, citizens debated quietly, sensing that the tides of history could shift in a moment, and that their lives could be forever altered. Even cyber warfare played its part. Networks buzzed with intelligence intercepts, fake narratives, and sudden surges in communication traffic. Analysts speculated that one false signal could spark panic, undoing the fragile path toward reconciliation. The handshake, if it happened, was not merely a diplomatic gesture. It was a pivot on which the entire global order could teeter. And here lies the ultimate suspense. The world was ready to witness an event unlike any in history. Yet no one could predict the consequences. Every nation, every alliance, every leader, and every ordinary citizen caught in the crossfire was a part of a story that could either culminate in peace or ignite chaos, the likes of which the world had never seen. In this tension, suspense became a living entity. Every second counted. Every conversation, every decision, every glance carried weight. And as the world held its collective breath, one question dominated all others. Could the impossible handshake actually happen? And if it did, would the world survive it or be forever changed? The ripple across the globe. The handshake had not yet happened, but the mere possibility was already reshaping the world. Every leader, every strategist, every citizen sensed that history was poised on a knife's edge. In Washington, intelligence briefings ran late into the night. Analysts debated not just Europe, but the cascading consequences worldwide. Would North American energy markets stabilize? Or would volatility spike if the handshake faltered? Could diplomatic overtures spark unforeseen opportunism in distant nations? Every scenario was meticulously calculated, yet uncertainty remained uncontrollable. Across Europe, capitals braced for what could happen next. Berlin's Foreign Office monitored, subtle signals from Moscow and Kyiv. Paris debated strategic contingency plans, while Warsaw evaluated both defense readiness and internal political stability. Markets fluctuated in real time, every subtle news update triggering a ripple of speculation, fear, or hope. In Asia, Beijing quietly recalculated its strategy. Could a peaceful reconciliation between Russia and Ukraine shift the balance of global influence? Would China gain leverage over European markets? Or would a stabilized East Europe complicate its expansionist ambitions? Tokyo, Seoul, and New Delhi followed closely, each considering diplomatic, economic, and military adjustments. Meanwhile, within Russia and Ukraine, hidden actors influenced outcomes in ways the public would never see. Senior intelligence officers communicated with intermediaries, quietly testing the sincerity of the other side. Advisors in both capitals debated tactics, sometimes agreeing, often conflicting, while each leader weighed the risk of appearing vulnerable against the reward of historic diplomacy. But the suspense extended beyond politics and strategy. Ordinary lives became part of the narrative. Civilians in Kyiv and Moscow shared rumors, anxieties, and small acts of hope. Social media amplified every gesture, every statement, every hint of change. Citizens watched, waiting for a signal that could redefine their futures. Even the cyber battlefield contributed to uncertainty. Network traffic surged as encrypted messages, false signals, and intelligence intercepts swirled in a digital fog. Analysts knew that one misinterpreted alert could ignite panic or sabotage delicate negotiations. The handshake, while physically simple, had become a pivot point on which the fate of continents balanced. And yet, despite this tension, unseen figures worked tirelessly behind the scenes. Retired diplomats, quiet mediators, and unsung negotiators acted as invisible hands nudging both sides toward possibility. Each confidential phone call, each discreet document, each late-night discussion carried potential to tip history toward peace or disaster. The world had entered a state of suspended animation. Every action had weight, every hesitation, every misstep, every carefully chosen word could either prevent catastrophe or accelerate it. Suspense had transformed from abstract tension into a living, breathing reality. And all of it centered around one question. If this handshake happened, could it truly change the world? Or was it a fragile illusion waiting to shatter under the pressures of history? The handshake that could change everything. The world had waited with bated breath. Every continent, every capital, every city was tense. Yet, in a quiet, heavily secured hall, history was about to be rewritten. Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky entered the room. No cameras, no headlines, just two men. Decades of tension compressed into a single moment. Advisors flanked them silently, notes held in trembling hands, aware that every gesture, every micro-expression could ripple across the globe. The two leaders faced each other. A silence descended thick, almost palpable. Journalists and foreign observers, barred from the room, speculated endlessly about who would blink first, who would assert dominance, and who would yield. And then it happened. A hand extended, slowly, tentatively. Suspense built like a storm ready to break. Fingers met in a handshake that carried the weight of decades, annexations, battles, sanctions, shattered alliances, all compressed into a single physical gesture. The room seemed to hold its breath. Putin's eyes narrowed slightly, scanning Zelensky's expression. Zelensky's jaw tightened, aware that the world was watching invisibly through intelligence channels, satellite feeds, and global media. One handshake. Yet it was more than a gesture. It was a decision that could alter history. Outside reactions exploded. In Moscow, analysts debated whether the gesture signaled genuine reconciliation or strategic deception. In Kyiv, citizens flooded social media, some in disbelief, others cautiously hopeful. Across Europe, governments monitored stock markets, energy pipelines, and military readiness, uncertain if the peace could endure. The ripple effects were immediate. Military commands hesitated mid-orders. Border checkpoints paused operations. Energy forecasts and market predictions swung wildly as nations recalibrated for a new potential reality. But even in this fleeting moment, tension lingered. Advisors whispered warnings about factions unhappy with compromise. Intelligence officers intercepted subtle signals that hinted at sabotage, miscommunication, and hidden agendas. Peace, though symbolized in a single handshake, remained fragile, a precarious balance between history and chaos. And yet, amid fear and uncertainty, a strange hope emerged. Children in Kiev played in streets that had once echoed with sirens. Citizens in Moscow cautiously discussed the future. Economies breathed in anticipation. The world had witnessed a moment that could redefine geopolitics. The suspense didn't end with the handshake itself. It had set off a chain reaction. Every leader, every citizen, every nation now had a new question to confront. Could trust long shattered by war and ambition be rebuilt? Could history bend toward peace, or would the fragile gesture shatter under the weight of lingering enmity? For one brief, suspended heartbeat, the impossible had become possible. And yet the world knew this. The story was only beginning. Medium-term consequences. The world reacts. The handshake had occurred. History had pivoted, yet the world was far from stable. Every decision from this point forward would either solidify peace or trigger unseen chaos. In Moscow, the political elite wrestled with uncertainty. Hardliners debated retaliation, fearing compromise signaled weakness. Yet some whispered privately about new economic opportunities, the possibility of normalization, and the chance to stabilize a country long shaken by sanctions and unrest. Putin, aware of these pressures, carefully balanced confidence with caution, knowing a single misstep could undo everything. In Kiev, Zelensky faced a delicate challenge. Citizens celebrated cautiously in the streets, but internal divisions simmered. Advisors warned of factions that would resist compromise, while economists calculated the fragile boost to trade and industry. The Ukrainian president now had to manage hope and skepticism simultaneously, a task as complex as any military operation. Across Europe, governments adjusted quickly. Berlin, Paris, and Warsaw analyzed how defense strategies and diplomatic relations must evolve. Military exercises paused or recalibrated. NATO reviewed readiness and potential cooperation with former adversaries. Financial markets fluctuated in anticipation. Energy contracts were renegotiated, and pipelines were cautiously reopened. Meanwhile, Asia watched closely. Beijing recalculated influence over Europe and Russia. Tokyo and Seoul prepared for regional contingencies, while New Delhi monitored potential shifts in global trade and strategic alliances. Even distant nations in Africa and Latin America considered how a stabilized Europe could shift resources and influence. The ripple extended to the everyday people. Families in Kiev returned to partially rebuilt homes. Children played in streets once scarred by artillery, and markets reopened under cautious optimism. In Moscow, citizens debated whether peace would last, their conversations balancing hope against decades of skepticism. But the suspense was far from over. Intelligence agencies intercepted subtle signals. Encrypted messages hinted at potential sabotage, rogue factions, or miscommunications that could reignite conflict. Social media buzzed with speculation, memes, misinformation, and real-time reactions amplified uncertainty across borders. The handshake, while historic, was fragile, a single point upon which the balance of nations now teetered. Economic shifts intensified the tension. Grain shipments, previously halted by war, resumed cautiously. Energy contracts were renegotiated, creating both opportunity and risk. Investment flowed into Europe, but volatility remained a constant shadow. Political analysts warned that while markets celebrated, underlying tensions had not disappeared. They had merely been relocated. And amid all this, a new form of suspense emerged: the unknown future. How would alliances evolve? Would old grievances resurface? Could peace endure against factions, misinformation, and the pressure of history itself? The handshake had opened possibilities, but it had also opened Pandora's box of consequences no one could fully anticipate. For the first time in decades, the world breathed with cautious hope, but the tension remained palpable. Every decision now mattered, every gesture could tip the scales, and while peace had a foothold, history reminded the world that fragile moments demand vigilance, intelligence, and courage. The world transformed: chaos, opportunity, and uncertainty. The handshake was no longer just a moment. It had become a pivot on which the future of continents now teetered. Every leader, every nation, every ordinary citizen was caught in the shockwaves. In Europe, borders that had been tense for decades became zones of tentative cooperation. Military exercises paused, but intelligence agencies never slept. Analysts calculated the subtle shifts in alliances: who would gain power, who would lose influence, and who would exploit the fragile new reality for personal gain. In Russia, whispers of dissent erupted quietly within political and economic circles. Hardliners questioned whether compromise was a betrayal. Oligarchs recalculated investments, seeing opportunity in a thawing economy. Citizens debated on the streets, unsure if this was genuine change or a carefully staged illusion. In Ukraine, Zelensky faced a paradox. The world celebrated a single gesture, yet the weight of expectations was crushing. Families reunited, but the pressure to maintain momentum in diplomacy, economy, and security created invisible fractures. Every decision now carried a magnitude. Beyond imagination, one wrong move could erase hope entirely. Across Asia, the reaction was no less intense. Beijing recalibrated global influence, recognizing that a stabilized East Europe altered trade dynamics and geopolitical leverage. Tokyo and Seoul adjusted military readiness, while New Delhi monitored potential shifts in energy and defense strategies. Even distant capitals in Africa and Latin America saw opportunity and risk in this new order. Meanwhile, global markets were in turmoil. Energy prices fluctuated wildly. Grain shipments restarted, but supply chains were fragile. Investment surged in Europe, yet every fluctuation triggered fear of collapse. The handshake had created a new reality. Yet that reality was fragile, unpredictable, and electric with suspense. And here's where it became truly cinematic. Hidden factions, rogue operatives, and unanticipated players began to emerge. Whispers of sabotage, secret plots, and covert manipulation hinted that peace could be disrupted at any moment. Even now, no one knew if stability was genuine or a facade waiting to crumble under unseen pressure. Culturally, the world began to shift. Propaganda machines faltered. Citizens questioned narratives they had long believed. Art, literature, and media reflected a collective suspense, the thrill of a world that might finally escape the cycle of conflict, yet feared it would relapse. Yet the most shocking element, unforeseen consequences. Environmental cooperation surged as tensions eased. Technology sharing accelerated. Education, trade, and scientific research experienced a renaissance of cautious collaboration. Nations that had been enemies suddenly became partners in projects that could alter the global landscape permanently. But for every opportunity, there was danger. Extremist groups, disinformation campaigns, and political opportunists lurked in shadows. The world's new chapter was not written. It was being drafted in real time. Every decision a sentence, every hesitation a comma in a story that could explode into chaos or blossom into unprecedented peace. And here lies the ultimate suspense. The handshake had not ended the story. It had ignited it. Every citizen, every leader, every hidden player now stood at the edge of history. Could humanity sustain this fragile peace? Or would ambition, fear, and history itself pull the world back into darkness? For the first time in decades, hope and terror existed simultaneously. And as the world watched, suspended between awe and fear, one truth became undeniable. History is alive. It waits for action, for choice, and for courage. And the next move, anywhere, by anyone, could rewrite everything. The world after the handshake. The handshake had occurred. History had shifted in a heartbeat. Yet the world didn't sigh in relief. It held its breath. Every nation, every city, every citizen felt the tremor of a moment that could rewrite centuries. In Kyiv, children ran through streets that had once known fear as a constant companion. In Moscow, citizens debated cautiously, their conversations punctuated with uncertainty and hope. Governments across Europe recalculated alliances, adjusted militaries, and rewrote contingency plans, all because a single gesture had dared to challenge the logic of conflict. Yet beneath the surface, suspense never faded. Hidden factions whispered in corridors, rogue operatives plotted quietly, and intelligence agencies monitored every shadow, every message, every subtle sign of potential chaos. Peace had arrived, but it was fragile, like glass suspended over a chasm. Brilliant yet perilous. Globally, the consequences rippled further than anyone imagined. Stock markets surged and tumbled, energy pipelines reopened, and new trade routes appeared on maps overnight. Technology and education experienced a renaissance, but every advancement carried the weight of uncertainty. Would collaboration endure? Or would old ambitions and rivalries pull the world back into tension? Even as hope began to bloom, new questions emerged. What would the next generation inherit from this delicate moment of peace? Could diplomacy truly sustain itself against the persistent forces of fear, pride, and history? Could humanity navigate the unpredictable consequences of a single handshake? And then the world realized something terrifyingly beautiful. The handshake was only the beginning. It had ignited possibilities, No one had dared to imagine alliances that could reshape continents, cultural renaissances, technological breakthroughs, and yet, lurking behind every positive shift, the shadow of the unpredictable remained. History now existed in real time. Every decision mattered more than ever. Every gesture, every word, every choice could ripple across the planet in ways unseen. And as the sun set over Europe, Asia, and the Americas, one truth became undeniable. The world was awake, alive, and forever changed by a single moment. For you, the viewer, this story is not just about leaders or nations. It's about potential, about choices, about courage in the face of uncertainty. It's a reminder that even in a world brimming with conflict, a single act, a handshake, a word, a decision can alter the course of history. And now, as this chapter closes, we leave you with questions that linger like shadows in the mind. What would you do if the world waited for your choice? Could humanity truly rewrite its destiny? Or will the next moment of history be defined by fear rather than courage? If you want to witness every hidden story the world never shows, if you want to explore what history could have been and what it might still become, subscribe now, join the journey, and stay with us. Because the world's greatest stories are not just in the past, they're unfolding in front of our eyes. And you don't want to miss a single moment of it.